So thank you for supporting the 49th of the Hong Kong International Film Festival. So you just watched the Silent Trilogy. So this year, I'm glad that we're able to present a focus program of Juho Skousmännen that is entitled The Empathetic Touch of Juho Skousmännen. So through his works, no matter short films or fictions, he's always making us believe that hope, no matter the situations is. And I believe that this is a very good timing to present him and to invite him to Hong Kong. So, and also to have a face-to-face section with us today. So anyway, so first of all, let me introduce the moderators of tonight, and she is the film critic, Ms. Joyce Yang. So please welcome. And the most important person, and this is his first time in Hong Kong, so please warmly welcome Mr. Juho Skousmännen.
Juho's love to silent cinema is impossible to miss. So much so, I even think that we should do tonight's conversation as a silent film, flashing text cards on screen instead of talking. And Juho said no, very politely. So here we are. Yeah, please. So silent film is a deliberate athletic choice for you for this silent trilogy. And it makes me think of Charlie Chaplin, George Méliès, and etc. But is it more like a homage to Finnish film history? For instance, The Moonshiner was actually originally a short film made in 1907.
Yes, so the first two, they are already old, not as old as silent films usually are, but the first one was done 2012, and the reason to do that, I was struggling with my debut film, Joulumäki, and then I kind of felt like I'm losing the playfulness and joy of filmmaking. Everything became so serious, so I just started to feel like, no, I just want to play with this media, and then I had this old Bolex camera, which is kind of that you wind and then you can shoot 30 seconds. So I'm like, I want to do something with this camera, something not serious, just like something a bit stupid. So that was the reason to do the first film, and actually the aim was to do a very funny film, because I love those funny silent movies. One of my best film experiences have been in film festivals, to see them with a live band and all. But then I met this guy, this Seppo, who plays the main character in the film, and he told me his story, which is basically the story of the film. And I realized, like, oh, it's not going to be just funny, it's actually quite sad. And then later when I got the music for the film, I realized, like, I think it's very, very sad. And yeah, the second one is a remake of first Finnish film ever made. And also done before the next feature film. So all these films are kind of like going back to this kind of child mode, to play with film, to have fun with it. Because making a feature film, there's long and stressing processes. So I think these are way to keep you way to enjoy filmmaking without too much stress.
Yeah, exactly. And we laughed out loud about that vision test scene. And it is not something of the original version. So where does it come from? Is it from real experience?
Yeah, so the original film is lost, so we never saw it. But this remake is based on a few articles from newspapers that we read. So we knew there's like two moonshiners. We knew that they had a pig for some reason. Then we knew that there's a car cheat, and then a couple of policemen. And then we made this movie, but that vision test, I don't remember where the idea came, but it's quite common in Finland when we were young and the illegal alcohol was cheap. So everybody said like, but be aware, you might lose your sight if you drink it. So it's kind of a, yeah, just to prove that it's a quality product.
Your first feature debut, Happy Today in the Life of Ollie Maki, was made in 16mm black and white too. So I wonder, what is it about this format that compels you to explore it constantly?
Yeah, we did, so the first of these were done in 2012, like 3 years before the first debut film, and the debut film wasn't supposed to be black and white, but it takes place in 62, and we tried to find this kind of a feeling of those films, like Cinema Verite or those, yeah, like French or British New Wave or East European New Wave or these documentaries like Pennebaker, and we tried different film stocks, like, but they were all color. But then we went to the grading, and there was the producer, my cinematographer, and we were there, and then we weren't satisfied with the looks. This was like a month before the shooting started, and then we just like, okay, let's try to take the colors out. And then we all realized, like, oh no, we have to make it black and white because this is the way we wanted, you know, it to look. Yeah, my producer already told everybody that it's going to be color film, and so he had a bit difficulties to call everybody who was putting money in it. But yeah, then we had a nice experience with this film stock, which is like reversal stock. So it's not really like high quality, but it's a film stock that they did then in the 60s. It was used for documentaries and newsreels and that kind of stuff. So we felt like, yeah, it's quite raw, but it still has this nice 60s vibe.
Exactly. I wonder, so what are the thoughts of you and your cinematographer, J.P. Passy? So he has been the cinematographers of all your films so far. So what are the thoughts behind that, you know, in crafting the visual styles? Because in compartment number 6, we see colors, we see natural light, the claustrophobic compartments, and the vast landscapes. So can you tell us about the visual and tone design?
Yeah, well, his background is in documentary, and I think we both share this love for reality, and that's something that we try to keep. Even though we are making fiction, we always try to keep this kind of a documentary quality in it, like using, like some of the films have been like mostly unprofessional actors, and even in Compartment we still had some non-professionals, and I think the using of natural light comes from the same reason, like to get this real life feeling. But on the other hand, we also love film, so when it's digital and very raw, naturalistic look, then it feels like a bit too much. So I think this kind of feeling of celluloid is, yeah, kind of soft layer that is enough to make it fiction.
Yeah, the silent trilogy, the time of silent trilogy, it blurs a bit because it looks like 1920s, but we can see Visa card, GPS, wide phones, etc. Definitely no computer and smartphones in your film. I wonder why you play time like that.
Yeah, one of the reasons was because I was preparing feature film, The Maki, that takes place in 62. And I was stressed about many things, and one of the things was the period, like how to make 62 look real. And I was quite anxious, and I hated everybody who was saying, like, commenting on period piece film, like, actually that or that detail wasn't existing back then. And then I felt like, okay, now that we are doing this silent film, and I never thought I'm going to show it in Hong Kong. It was supposed to be like just a couple of screenings in Kokkola in my hometown. So I felt like, okay, fuck this all, and just like, let's have things like modern cars in the background and all that, so nobody can say like those things didn't exist, because it's not reality. It's just a weird piece of time that we are having. And even the second one, there's this cars, there's this old Volvo passing by, and yeah, in the last one there is the GPS. So it's kind of, I think it's connected to the idea of not being serious, but being more playful. So we can do whatever we want, basically.
In compartment number 6, Laura, she travels to see ancient petroglyphs. And Olli Mäki is set in the 1960s. It seems that film is a way to connect with the past. So I wonder, is this a nostalgic thing for you, or more like a manifesto for the future? Are you a very nostalgic person?
Yeah, I think I am. I always said I'm not. But I'm trying to accept what I am, and I think that's one of those things. But I don't really know what nostalgia means, but I feel that in these films, in the first one, because even though it deals about Boxer in '62, for me it's a very, very personal film, because I had this kind of weird situation. My diploma film won main award in Cannes Film Festival student section. So the part of the prize is that they will invite you there. And so I had this kind of too much expectations, and I felt like it's kind of destroying my creativity and all that. And when I found that story, I felt like actually now I can deal my own personal struggle, which is at the same time serious and ridiculous. But if it's set in '62 in a different world, there's this distance that kind of helps me to make it more clear. And Compartment is set in late 90s somewhere. And the reason for that is it's also like one of the main reasons is that I didn't want to have smartphones in it. Because traveling with a smartphone is totally different than traveling without a smartphone. You don't basically need anyone, which is kind of sad. But it's also memory. So I think that, I don't know if it's the nostalgia or if it's just the distance that I need to see things more clearly. And then you can turn them into a story. Because stories are always a bit more clear than real life, which is a mess.
Just to clarify, so Juho, he does have a smartphone and he's a car. Okay, so your film handled violence with restraints, very different from Aki Kaurismäki. He has not stylized physical clashes, but in your films, the boxing in Olli Mäki has been dealt with, more like exhaustion rather than triumph. And Compartment number 6 took a sidestep from the novel's very violent plot entirely. So I wonder, so how do you navigate what to show versus not to show when you're dealing with genres like sports, bio, or romance?
I don't know. In the end, it is just, I think those things that stay while preparing, while writing the script, while then you start casting, the location scouting, and the things that stay in the end are the things that somehow resonate in you. And sometimes you're not fully aware why. So I can't really, I don't have like a clear answer, but I think that kind of very violent, almost brutal parts in the novel weren't something that I was never interested about. And I think they just faded away. Because then, yeah, you're not really that interested about it. And in Olli Mäki, we had a difficulty because we were doing a boxing film, very undramatic boxing movie. And I remember when we were writing it, everybody helped us to be more dramatic. And I think they were like good advices, but we always felt like, no, but then it's not the film that we want to make. And then they asked, okay, so what kind of film you want to make? And we were like, we didn't have any clear answer. But I remember, like, one of those things that they advised us to do was like the manager should be more selfish, more ambitious, and Raija, the girlfriend of Olli, should be more like, it's either me or the boxing, you have to choose. And all of these things felt like, yeah, I know they will make it more dramatic, more kind of strong, but it's not the film that I want to make. Yeah, I don't know how we end up into that kind of, yeah, it's partly subconscious, but I think it is, yeah, mainly trying to be honest with the feelings that I'm having while doing something, and I think these things are just touching me. And, but at the same time, I'm afraid always when I watch the edit, I feel like there's nothing in this movie. Like I feel like I gave away everything, and now I'm just left with people staring at each other. So, yeah, but I'm happy they still have something in it, but I'm not, yeah, I don't know what is the power in these films.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of beauty in this kind of simplicity in your films. And your characters feel so real. They're flawed, tender, but never idealized. However, when we look at the compartment number 6, Yuri and Sadie and Yuri Borisov's characters diverged from the original novel. I was very surprised to find out how different are they from Rosa Lippmann's story. Yeah, I wonder, how did you find your version of the story out of that original novel?
Yeah, well, Rosa Lippmann is a great author, Finnish author, and I read this book already in 2011 and wanted to make a movie about it. At the same time, I felt like it's impossible to make a movie about it. And it's a Russian language. The novel actually takes place in Soviet Union in 80s. But when we started to write it, yeah, the process was like that, like when my co-writers asked why I want to do it, I didn't have any answer. But then when we were working, some things stayed and some went off or faded away. And casting, which is, I think, maybe the most important part of filmmaking. That's the biggest choices that the director has to do. And it's essential part. And in this case, first of all, I found Sadie. And she was like 10 years older than the character in the novel. But I wanted to work with her. I think the way she spoke about the book, about the script, I think she was really, and also the experiences she had. She used to work in ships, in cargo ships, so she used to work in this kind of very male, masculine environments. And she also studied in Russia. So it was more important to work with her than to have the same character that is in the novel. And then we tried to find a Russian actor, and couldn't find. There was like great actors, but the chemistry was never there. And then I saw Yuri in one film, and I said, like, I want to meet this guy because he was quite amazing. And then the casting director in Russia said that he's totally opposite what I've been looking for. Why do you want to meet him? But it was also like just very strong gut feeling. And then when I met Yuri and saw him together with Sadie, I felt like, okay, this is the movie. And now I can forget the book. now this is what I wanted to make. So I think that was the moment when I actually saw the film, kind of, what is it about?
In the original story, Yuri's role was like 50 years old and an ex-prisoner, and it's very different from the film is now. And how did you introduce that character to him, or have you adapted after you confirmed that Yuri will be the cast?
I think I told him that this is not, I mean, I want to work with you, and then you forget the script that we have now. And it's much easier, like, if you find the right character, and this kind of story, if there's not a chemistry between them, there's nothing. And if you miscast this kind of a film, there's nothing you can do. But when you find that kind of right people in it, it can be quite amazing. And I also realized I always pitched the film like it's a story of two totally different kind of characters who have to share the same compartment, and then little by little they start to see something similar in the other. But when I saw these two and I went home back to Helsinki, I realized, no, that's not the story. The story is that they are already the same person. They are really the kind of twins. And during this trip they will realize, because they are like covered behind these social roles, role of a man, role of a woman, role of a Russian, role of a Finnish person, student, whatever, all these kind of cultural roles, and they are hiding behind them, but if they can see through them, and the time obviously will help them force them to see through these roles, then they realize like, we're actually almost like a sister and brother who never knew about the other.
During the audition, so which scene, did you give any scene for Sadie and Yuri to act out?
Yeah, I gave them a scene, but it's not in the...
Oh, it's not
yeah.
in the... Okay.
But I remember Jura was moved, because I was a bit... I was a bit prejudiced, and I felt like, can I find a Russian man, a male actor, who can really cry? Who has this sensitive side, so I was testing the sensitive side. And then we did this scene when they are like coming back from the babushka, the old woman that they are visiting, and then he tells a story that is kind of a joke, but it's a personal story at the same time. And then I asked him to, like, trying to tell the story so that we see him getting emotional, but he tries to hide it. And then he dropped one teardrop, and he literally did this, and I was like, wow. And then I felt like, that's quite a strong technical thing, because we were like, playing like he's trying, like it was so artificial, the thing, but he still, I believe in that emotion. And then I asked him to do it more. Sorry. First time I saw his eyes getting wet, but there was no teardrop. Then I asked him to do it again with one teardrop. And he did it, and I was like, whoa, this guy is like a robot. With a nice human touch, obviously, which is always needed. But yeah, so I was testing this side. And also just to see them together, and also being in the same space with him. Because I think when you're creating a crew or you're casting, I think it's very important for a director to think how I feel in this situation. Can I be me, or do I start to pretend? And what kind of things are coming out of me when I'm with a... I think we are always a bit different versions when we are with different people. And I felt with Jura and Sadie that, okay, this is the director I need to be in this film.
How did you direct Yuri's body gesture? Because his role doesn't talk much. I remember the first scene of his appearance, he was taking out of a big bottle of vodka and started to drink in the compartment. So did you give him any kind of guidance in terms of acting?
I don't really give details, so I mostly try to find connection with the actors before and then talk about the script. And then they bring their own ideas, and I think when we are reading the script and then talking about the script, the main thing is to understand it in the same way, to understand the core of the scene. So I think many things can change, but what's the essence of the scene should be there, and that should be something that we can share. And if we can share it, I believe then they can act it. But if they are, usually I think like bad acting is a result of not really understanding why the scene is there, what the character is doing. But if they understand it, I think the performance will be good.
So do you usually engage actors in the script writing process?
Yes, yeah, as early as I can, because I'm also writing after casting,
And
like adjusting the script for them.
okay. For example, the compartment number 6, so did you invite Sadie or Yuri to contribute to the dialogue or the scene, the script?
Yeah, with Sadie we did it like longer. She was casted like a year before the shootings, and Yuri was casted like half a year. So with Yuri, obviously he lived in Russia and he was working quite a lot, so we didn't have that much time to meet and talk. But yeah, as much as we could. And then the first meeting with them was, obviously when you're casting these kind of people and you don't know really how it's going to turn out, you have a gut feeling that you should trust, but still you don't know for sure. But when Yuri came to Helsinki and then we had like a couple of days to read the script, during the first day we read the script, started talking about it. I think everybody was really honest with the potential of the script, but also the doubts. And then we went to have dinner, and then we thought, okay, what now? Okay, I think there's one interesting place in Helsinki. It was a sauna, which is like, I think it's called the most public sauna because it's free for everybody and you can just go in and heat it yourself. And it's a do-it-yourself sauna, which is a bit weird place. But we started talking about it, and then Yuri and Sadie were like, yeah, let's try it. And then we went, after dinner, we went to this sauna and we got naked, had sauna, and then we went swimming and back to sauna, and then we felt like, okay, I think now we are not afraid of each other anymore after this experience. So I felt very comfortable.
So what about Sadie? She convinced you that she's the right fit for Laura.
What?
So what about Sadie Haller? What about her that convinced you that she's the right fit for Laura, the character?
I think her thoughts. I think the way she talked about the book and also about the script, about her years in Russia, her years in this cargo ship, and humor. She's hilarious with a very dark humor, and yeah, I think that was it. And then also she's a good actress, but she mainly worked in theater, so this was her first feature, like main role.
So did Yuri talk to you about his role of Nora before, after the filming? His role in Nora is a little bit identical to apartment number 6.
Yeah, I'm a friend with Sean Baker. So he was in our premiere in Cannes because he had a film, Red Rocket, in Cannes the same year. And then after that he asked Yuri's contacts. Sevilla. But I was supposed to visit their shootings in States, because Yuri was very nervous to go there and to work in a new environment in English. So I said, like, yeah, no, don't worry, I'll be there for you. But then I had some other things, so I never got there. But I'm happy he did it, and he's now really, I think everybody wants a piece of him.
Your film deals with language very uniquely. I can see Compartment Number 6 was an international production, and it's a little bit different from Olimaki. Olimaki was an international production as well. But in Compartment Number 6, the two leads, the language they spoke is Russian. So it's a foreign language for Sadie Hala, but native for Yuri. So I wonder, so what do you think about language and the language gaps or the silence in your film? Sometimes I feel like it holds more meaning, rather than dialogue in your film.
Yeah, I think we tend to think that we are communicating by words, and obviously we are, but I think there's so much communication beyond the words that we are having. Usually, words also and common language help you to lie, but you can't lie without words. And I think this is something which is also very cinematic, because there are often scenes in movies when people are talking, but when you're watching them, you know the other things that are going around at the same time. And I think that's always much more interesting than the things we are saying out loud. I think always when we are talking, there's a bit of what is the word, like acting or pretending. Therefore I think the most important things in films happen beyond the words. Somebody might say something nice, but I think the cinema in the end is just like two people looking at each other. And the way that look is changing, I think is I think that can be the most powerful thing in cinema.
Yeah, it's just like the looking in Olimaki. I really enjoy when Olimaki was surrounded by the journalists and he looked at his girlfriend. And you don't need to say that is love, but you feel the emotion is definitely there.
Yes, you feel the comfort, you feel a lot of things when through the gaze. Yeah.
Is that why you kind of juxtapose the drawing, the very bad or the interesting, playful drawing next to the petroglyph? They're kind of the same thing, and you kind of put more emotion on the drawing rather than the petroglyphs.
Yeah, because I think in Compartment the petroglyphs, they were always a bit more like Irina's thing, the girlfriend that stays in Moscow. And I actually am a bit sad, like people don't really get it from the film, but it was like, I think Sadie's character, Laura, in the film, is just doing this trick because she kind of tries to please Irina. She tries to be the person who is also very interested about the petroglyphs, but actually she's not really interested. But she just, when Irina can't go, she says like, yeah, no, I will do it. And I think her idea is to come back and to say like, yes, it was amazing. Because she thinks Irina loves that kind of people. So he goes into the street, but there's nobody who sees her. So it's kind of useless. And then when she's staring at the petroglyphs, also the reason why we are not there with her is because I think she's not feeling anything. And then I felt it's really difficult in the movie to show this moment when she has done all this trick. She goes there and she watches the petroglyphs and she doesn't feel anything. I felt if we are showing the petroglyphs, the audience is starting to think many things, and none of them are the things that I want them to think. So the reason, not to show them was it, and there's also this comparison between the fleeting moments, which is life, and then something that stays, which are the stone and the things we leave behind. But so I think we are also thinking that those things that stay are the meaningful things, and the fleeting moments are just like something fleeting, something that doesn't have that strong meaning. But what is life anything else than fleeting moment? So I think if we can see or realize the value in those moments, like living person, or wrestling in the snow, doing stupid stuff, can we really appreciate life if we are just like putting value in the things that will stay?
I actually expected to see a grand reveal at the end of compartment number 6, to see the moment that Laura, she visited the petroglyph, finally. It's just like The Brutalist, that film, you know, at the end there is an architectural climax. But you choose to downplay showing them, and I wonder, was this a quiet rejection of spectacle, or it's kind of intuitive alignment with, you mentioned documentary, or French New Wave, or new realism?
I think avoiding the spectacle, I think the main thing was, I think in film, in order to see something, you need to fade out certain things. And the main thing in the compartment for me was this feeling of wrestling in the snow. When they are kind of a child again, and they are free from, I don't know, from what, they are just like, this weird, playful moment that they are having. I think that was the main thing in the end. And I felt like if we are showing the better clues or something that we've been kind of building up, will eat this moment, which I found was the most interesting thing. I always feel like, if you're showing two things at the same time, they are a bit eating each other. So if you want, you have to decide what's the most important, and then to fade out a bit the other, and then so then you can make, the invisible visible if you clean all the other elements.
I think bars in a film is definitely something visible,
Yes.
and in Finnish film as well. It's like a sanctuary place, and after a bad day, you can walk into a bar and find music and some shared silence there. And even in the Silent Trilogy, I think the whole universe, the destination is a bar, and everyone will end up there. I wonder what kind of bar culture at Finland informed that kind of recurring thing, the visible in Finnish film?
Yeah, we have a very active bar culture. I don't have a really clear answer, but I like bars. I like the comfort of strangers, and this kind of weird, like it doesn't belong to anyone. I like the feeling in them. In the first Silent Short, when he goes to this bar, it's a very nice bar in Kokkola, and they are, I don't know where, it was an old idea, like somebody goes to a bar, he doesn't have any money, and they are collecting this thing like they collect in Finnish churches for charity. And I think people who can't find the solace or comfort from church or from movies or those things, I think bars are kind of a place for those people, and there are many of those in Finland.
I know you play in a band too. Does your band perform at bars very often, or did you compose music scores for film?
No, I play drums, so I can't compose. I can just do rhythms. I was more involved in the last film, because there, when I was writing it, I had this different sections on my mind, like this is going to be more like soft, and this is going to be more like going forward, okay, let's do this kind of music. So I had a bit more input there, but in the first two I didn't have that much. Yeah. It's the same band that made music for Olli Mäki film, and I know them very well. So I trust their skills more than mine.
And can you talk a little bit about the sound design of your films? Do you prefer ambient sound over dialogues?
I think sounds are extremely important. Like in these ones, I worked, so basically these films, originally they were meant to show on 60mm projector and live band and live Foley artist. It was kind of the cinematic performance. And I was amazed when I started to work with this Foley artist, because it's not just like when somebody is opening a door, it's not just the sound of a door that they are doing, but you can actually make it sound a bit sadder, a bit funnier. You can, like, just steps can sound, there can be emotion in it. And even though I love music, but I think music quite often is used a bit too heavily in films. It's kind of forcing you to feel, it's kind of manipulating, it's telling you what to feel. Obviously every fiction filmmaker is manipulating and kind of trying to affect the emotions of the audience, but I feel the more subtle way to do it is the sound design. And I think that was kind of one thing that I learned when doing these silent films, where you only had the Foley sounds and the music. And then in Compartment, when we had the train that has a lot of different sounds, we used the train almost as an orchestra to do rhythms and to do different sounds, and also there's some chords that are hidden. So you think you're just listening to the sound of the train, but they're actually like composed things in it. Yeah, so it's a nice way of creating emotions.
I will ask the last question, and then I will open the floor to audiences. So your
Sorry, I have one. Actually, I don't really have wise things to say, but I read a lot, and one of the things that I think it's a good comment about sound design is from Bresson, and he said that the sounds are like affecting you from inside to outside, as images are coming from outside into your head, but sounds are kind of going into your head, and they make the difference the way you see things. Like if you're sitting in a bus and just watching the everyday view, it looks different the way if you're listening a different song or something else. So yeah, sound design is just, it's crucial for me.
Yeah, I want to ask about the theme of dislocation, because I see dislocation of your characters a lot. They are outplaced and they move on, and somehow they all embody the spirit of road films. So I wonder what attracts you to stories about dislocation, or are there any road films inspired you or influenced you?
I think that this location is where the things happen when we arrive. What's there to tell? Like, I think it's always the end of the story. I think every, like, whether it's not like really a road movie, but I think in one's life, when you are in a moment, when you're kind of between things, that's where you have the inner conflict, that's where you have kind of the the doubt, you are kind of going somewhere, you are still, I think that's just an interesting moment when we are between things, and that's where you get the tension also.
Thank you, Juho. Now let's open the floor to audience. We have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So please keep it brief and one question per person so we can hear as many voices as possible. So maybe that girl, the girl in the white shirt or grey shirt. So we pass the mic for
sorry, there's two mics over there. Maybe you can just go outside and ask questions. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So
do you mind to go to the microphone?
Yeah.
What was the journey for you to become a director? Did you have any suggestions for any emerging filmmakers?
Yes, it was quite random. I did films when I was a kid, with my brother, with my sister, and then 2 cousins. But we ended when we were like teenagers, because we felt like it's a bit childish. And then later, I think I was 16, I saw a theater play that I was totally amazed by. And then I think that was the moment when I felt like I want to do something connected to performing arts. But then it took quite many years to understand that film is my thing. And I'm still doubting a lot. But I was always much more interested about theater. But I tried to apply in theater school, but I didn't get in. And then the same year, I got into film school. I think that was an important moment. But I think film is much more kind of, it's better for me. So it was quite random, and I wasn't really civilized about films when I got into film school. I was always a bit embarrassed that I don't know anything. I still am. But it was quite random. But to the other question, I had honored to meet Milos Forman like 10 years ago, and we asked the same question: do you have any suggestion for emerging filmmakers? And he said, tell the truth and try not to be boring. And I think that was a pretty good advice. It's easier to say than done.
Any more questions?
And focus on script writing.
I think, if you, okay, maybe that gentleman, please. Yep. Yeah, you can go there, sorry.
I got one simple question.
Oh, sorry, he is walking to the microphone. You will be the next one.
Thank you. I'm a big fan, especially compartment number 6. So my question is actually about music. So you've used lots of songs, different genre and languages in compartment number 6, especially the one that ends the film. I spent quite a lot of time tracking that song down from the Mongolian bands. So what kind of songs you would choose in your films, and do you have like a special favorite, or what are your general taste in music that you would prefer to use in your films? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's also like just trying to be open what you feel, what resonates in you. Because the Mongolian song that is in the end of Compartment, I would have never thought I would need something like that, or even I would want something like that. But it was I wrote it with 2 Estonian writers, and the other one sent this song to me. Because the novel takes place in Trans-Siberia Tract, and it ends in Mongolia. So at that time, the script was ending in Mongolia, and he sent me this song. And I listened to it, and I felt just very happy listening to that song. And kind of, I don't know, I felt like I'm free, I was kind of careless. And that was the moment, that it was the thing that I wanted the main character to have at the end of the film. So every time, basically every day when we were writing it, I was doubting, I was afraid, and like, oh, well, this is going to be terrible. And then I listened to that song, and it made me just feel like relaxed. That was a really important song, but yeah, I think it's just, and Voyage, Voyage, which is playing many times in the film, came when we were in Estonia, driving, sitting in a taxi, and it played, and it also went, this song, I remember, this is amazing, and then, yeah, so I think many of those things are kind of, you just get them somewhere, but if you're open and feel like, yeah, there's something in it, I think you don't need to explain. You just need to be very open and honest the way you feel.
Thank you. So, yeah, do you want to ask a question to the microphone?
Can I just ask here? Yeah, it's also about song. I'd like to know what is the song. I'd like to know what is the song about.
In the bar that the band is singing in the first video.
Yeah, it's very, we didn't translate it into English.
Yeah, there's no translation.
I can't remember the reason. I think it had something issues with the copyright. But it's really sad song. It's about longing a person for years, and then finally when you meet her, you just realize that all the emotions that you remember, they are all gone. They all faded away. And so he's asking a wind to come and dry his tears. Yeah, very happy song.
Any other question? Okay, we have so many. Maybe at the front row. Thank you, Mimi.
Thanks so much. You're watching two wonderful feature films we've had the privilege of watching this week. Many years have passed in that time though, so I think everyone would love to know what you're cooking up next.
Yeah, I'm now in the pre-production of my next feature. It has took quite a long time, but yeah, shooting next year.
Tell us more.
I'm not telling you. I won't tell you. It's going to be very bad. I'm trying to keep the expectations low. Yeah, it will be also in a weird language. We are shooting it in Denmark. I don't speak Danish. So, but yeah. It's called Diver.
Diver. Next question. Anyone? Okay, I see.
Hello, director. I want to ask, did the Chris Marquis film style affect you in a way because you have similar cold humor in your film? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, Korsbäck has been doing films as long as I've been living, so I think there is an influence that I can't escape. So I like this kind of dry humor, and maybe it is also because of his movies. If somebody would ask, like, is he an influence of my work, I would say, like, no. But I think it's one of those things, like when you like something, it has an influence, and I really like his work. So I think there's a influence, but obviously he has his own style. He's really unique. So I'm not trying to copy him.
Did he invite you to play your band in his film?
Yeah, she knew that. Yeah. And then I sent the demo And then he answered a few weeks after, I was like, did you receive the demo? I was like, yeah, I wrote a jukebox in the film, so I don't need the band anymore. Like, nice way to say, no thank you. Yeah. But I played it in 2 his films, only in one scene. Yeah. In Fallen Leaves and in what was the other one? Other Side of Hope. So I'm sitting in a bus and then I'm standing in a bar.
So always fun. I will try to find you out in those films because I didn't notice that when I watched it. I think
I'm acting, so I'm doing character.
Okay, we have a time for last question. Okay, maybe that lady.
Hello, Mr. Yuko, and I have a question about the state of creating. As you mentioned, there is fear about whether you think there is something in what you in your work. Like, I mean, of course there is something, but as a creator, how do you overcome or let go that kind of hesitation during the process? Thank you.
How do I overcome the hesitation? During casting. Or creating. I used to drink a lot, but now I'm trying to avoid it, and because it's not really, it's very easy way to be more like get a better self-esteem and not being that afraid. But I think it's not, in the long run, it's not really good advice. I think what helps me is to realize that every filmmaker is going through the same. So it's just like accepting that this is part of the game. And there's no way to really get over it. And I think actually, if you're not hesitating, if you're not afraid, then there's something wrong in the process, because it usually means that you don't care. But if you care about something, then you are afraid, and you are nervous, and you get all these kind of annoying feelings. And I remember I did this one stupid, like a few episodes of stupid Finnish TV before Compartment, because that was a long time after last touring. So I told my producer that can I direct something so that I know how to be on set. So I did 3 episodes, I think, and I didn't really care about the content or anything about it. And my wife told me once when I came home, she said, like, I've never seen you so happy during shootings. And I'm like, that's true. Yes, because I don't care. I'm just like going to work, being happy after it. And it's kind of paradox, because when I was doing Compartment, we were shooting in very difficult places, in difficult weather conditions. And I was so anxious, and I wasn't really happy. And I felt like, should I continue doing this? Something that means so much to me that I'm like really, like, super anxious. Or should I do something that makes me happy? I still don't know the answer, but I think, try to embrace that anxiety, all that hesitation, and then also trying to find the courage to trust your feelings, because I think that is what counts in the end. Yeah.
It's all about the bittersweetness of creation.
Yeah, creating is not just fun. But yeah, trying to enjoy that kind of, take it as an adventure, I think. Yeah. And you don't need to succeed. Like there's no way to, yeah, I think that's one of the worst things filmmaker can think while doing something, or creator. Like this has to be good.
Before we wrap up, do you have anything to say to Hong Kong audiences?
No, thank you for staying. I know it's hot outside, so I kind of get it why you're here.
Okay, so what stays with me after the film is really how glorified ordinary people and ordinary life could be. So that's really a kind of happiness and being kind of certain. And I really want to say thank you, Yuho, for sharing this moment with Hong Kong International Film Festival tonight in the theatre, and with the people who truly believe in the magic of cinema. Thank you.
Thank you.